All right, it's 7:01, and I'm going to go ahead and get started. I guess everybody will jump on as they go. Just making sure. Okay. All right, we're going to talk tonight about the scarcity mindset. Um, and the reason I'm going to talk about that is there are a lot of reasons. There are a lot of reasons that we get held back in practice. That chiropractors hold themselves back. There's, you know, um, not really understanding what it is you do, having that sense of security or that sense of certainty about practice. Um, that's some of it. Some of it is just your own attitude toward what chiropractic is, what it's not, what you're capable of, what you're not capable of. But one of the biggest things that I have seen that hold us back in practice is this scarcity mindset. And I'm going to give you a couple examples of this. Several years ago, I was speaking in Denver, Colorado. And I was talking about this very thing that chiropractors have such a hard time, because that's why they give their care away, they give their services away, they barter and they do these things. And a chiropractor come up to me right afterwards, and he had this deer in the headlight look of, you know, scared, and he said, "That's me. That's who I am." He said, I have this fear of making money, really. And so, and I'll never forget the look in his eye. It was kind of crazy. It was the way he went to chiropractic school, spent all this money to be a doctor, and then got out in practice, and he's terrified of actually making any money. And another little story, and I've told this story many times, but it jumped out of my head when I was getting ready to talk about all this, was years ago I was speaking at the OCA here in Oklahoma, the Oklahoma Chiropractic Association. I was addressing the group, and at the very back of the room, there was a couple 300 doctors there. In the back of the room, there was a doctor leaning against the wall, and he was standing next to another chiropractor who actually was a friend of mine. And he just kind of leaned over to him and he said, "I don't like that guy." And my buddy didn't say anything. He said, "Well, how come?" He goes, "He makes too much money." It's like, where does that come from? Where does that come from? And I've seen everything in between. I've seen a lot of things in between where chiropractors get so caught up in this mindset. And so I really believe that if we spend a little time talking about where it comes from and what creates it, then we can spend some time in how to basically how to defeat it, how to overcome this. I know James Rhodes. I know James will be on here. We've talked about this many times. That when you practice, you come from humble beginnings, and you practice and you start making money. Well, when you start making money, you start feeling guilty about it. So let's dive in the middle of this. So understanding the scarcity mindset. I want you to imagine. And maybe some of you grew up this way, that you're a child, and every time you guys go to the grocery store, or every time you go somewhere, you go to a restaurant, we can't afford it, we can't afford this. And it's really kind of sad that we were raised that way. And when you grow up with a less than, it's not just your wallet or your finances, your mind adapts to that environment. And your brain starts creating this feeling of everything is limited, there's not enough, and it's unpredictable, right? That's one of the things that you raised with. And I was raised this way. This is what's crazy. I was raised just like this. I was growing up in the Southwest Missouri, in the country. My father was the world's worst. For whatever reason, I remember this. He had a picture up on the wall, and I'm sure my mother didn't put it up there. And it basically said, due to the bill not being paid, the light at the end of the tunnel will no longer be on. It was just an attitude of not having enough or never going to have enough. My father was one of those that we'll talk about through this course of this talk, is that everything was, we're victims. It wasn't our fault. Or he worked, and what's crazy is he worked so hard. One of the hardest working people I knew, but he never really achieved or accomplished or acquired anything, because in his brain he created that that's not what you're supposed to do. I get contacted sometimes by doctors that say, and this is two different kinds of chiropractors, right? One chiropractor says, hey, you know, I'm going to take a break, doc. I'm going to take a break. I need to save some money. So they're going to try to save what little bit, you know, that they can. And one of the things they're going to save is by coaching. And then I'm going to get another call, say, hey, doc, you know, I've got myself in a situation. You know, I'm behind my bills, or I need to overcome this. And they'll call me and get a coaching call. It's like, what do we do? Completely two different mindsets. And so what happens is we fall into the scarcity mindset about trying to hoard and hang on and save instead of diving in and create and accomplish and accumulate. At its core, the scarcity mindset is belief that resources, money, time, and opportunities are limited, and that you must consistently fight to hold on to what little you have, no matter how much you have. That's what's crazy. So no matter how much you have, you could have so much abundance, and you're still going to find that core, you know, that everything is limited, that you're going to lose it, right? So let's talk about some of these things. One of them is a fear of spending, which is it's a feeling of anxiety when making purchases, even for essential items. This is how you know that in your core that this is kind of what went on, is that in your core that you were taught these things. Sometimes there's people who have like a hoarding behavior. They're keeping items just in case, because you're unsure if you'll ever have access to them again. You just don't get rid of anything, right? You don't get rid of anything. What's funny is growing up in the country, and maybe many of you were raised like this and you know what I'm talking about, that, you know, down there, if somebody had a car or a truck or whatever, and they would drive it until basically wheels come off of it. They would never get rid of it. They would just pull it there somewhere in the yard, somewhere there by the barn lot or whatever, because you never know when you might need to get a part from it, which is kind of crazy. You think, okay, when's the next time you're going to buy a 68, you know, Ford truck? Like that's not the car you're going to get, but you never know. And so there was old trucks and vehicles all over my grandparents' farm, because they had that mindset. You never know when you're going to need a part from it. Short-term focus. A lot of times people prioritize their immediate needs over long-term goals, or the pressure of surviving day to day. You know, they're like, you know, all the things that we look at is like, well, what can we get today? What can we do today? How can we survive today? And then this is why people don't save. They don't save anything. They don't put anything back, because what they've done is, because of their poverty mindset, the scarcity mindset, they've created that, well, if I save, I won't have enough for today. And this holds us back. There was a famous study I read. I wanted to share it with you. These behavioral economists, Cinda Hill and Eldar, found that when people are preoccupied with scarcity, and I thought this was really fascinating, when people get preoccupied with it, whether it's money, food, or time, there's a scarcity mindset with money, food, or time, it reduces their cognitive bandwidth, and this is their word. But what this means is their mental capacity for planning, problem solving, and future thinking is completely restricted, right? Simply put, worrying about survival consumes mental energy. Worrying about survival consumes mental energy. This happens in the office many, many times. You guys get consumed with, you know, your brain gets consumed with, what if they don't come back, or what if our practice goes down, or what if they don't pay? And I get it when you first start in practice, but what happens is we carry those trends and habits along with us. Now I'm gonna, you know, and here's the thing. This is what I want to talk to you guys about. A lot of times, you know, we're raised poor. Now, some of you weren't, but I'll address that. But I'm talking about maybe not necessarily even poor, like lower middle class poor, but this is what happens when you were raised that way. When you grow up in a household where finances is insecurity is a norm, your brain starts to internalize the patterns, these scarcity patterns. Some people grow up without financial stability and never learn the value of money. As a result, they often spend impulsively, treating money with easy come, easy go attitude, rather than something to be managed. They struggle to understand budgeting or saving, viewing money simply as a means to get what they want in the moment. You know, this was my father, and this was me years ago. It was the same thing. You know, you didn't have money, and so when you got some, you know, we would, you know, what was crazy is I remember my dad. He worked. He always worked, and he always made a good, you know, I should say good, decent living. We had a house, and he had a car, and you know, we were fine. But then what we would do is on the weekends we would go and we would cut wood and we would sell it and he would make extra money. We would make, we'd make 200 or 300 extra dollars on a weekend cutting and selling wood for people with fireplaces and wood stoves. He and at the time I didn't know any different. I thought that's what you did. It was spent before the weekend was over. I mean, it was spent on a fishing trip or things that you really shouldn't be spending it on. It was never instead of like making that money, putting it back, collecting and accumulating it, then taking it, investing in it or whatever. It was just spent because that was just a mindset, right? There's no that easy come easy goes attitude. There's we struggle to understand budgeting or saving, view money simply as a means to get what they want in a moment, and a lot of times because of financial illiteracy. They frequently find themselves in situations where they're running out of money or unsure how to fix or plan for the future. It was always the thing. I don't have enough. We don't have enough. That costs too much, And so these things, for me, fortunately, I shifted the gears and I got out of this. But so many people I talk to, so many chiropractors that are actually successful, or they get to a certain level of success. They get to 80 a week, 100 a week, 120 a week, and they start making an X amount of money. They could double their collections. They could be making so much more money. They just simply didn't because they're afraid of these things. Now, I will tell you what happened for us. When we got into practice, we first started to make money. My attitude was, well, I want a new truck, and so I would go look at them, and we'd look at the price, but I didn't really look at the price. I looked at how much the payment was per month, right? And a lot of people do that. And so, you don't look at the big picture. Well, Shannon and I hired a lady, her name's Jane. She's become a great friend of ours. She was our first financial advisor, and she, set me down more than Shannon, but said, look, you got to quit looking at it, how much it is per month. We got to start looking at it, as the bigger picture because long-term spending and gains. And it really made a big shift on how we do things, right? And as a child, we have this hyper awareness. I read this here recently. I wrote it down. A hyper awareness of resources. As a child, or maybe even a young adult. Maybe you were fine as a child, but then you got out on your own, and then things got really, really, really tough, and you had to struggle. You had to struggle hard, and then that struggle created the version of you that is today, and you just can't quite let it go. You maybe in your brain, every single dollar, you could have $10,000 in your pocket, and $1 means everything to you. Which again, what that does is it creates an attitude toward growth. It holds you back because then what happens is if you think, well, if I grow too much, then something bad's going to happen, or we may not have enough time, or there's all kinds of different things that come with that. A lot of times this heightened awareness can make it difficult to spend on yourself without guilt, even when you can afford it. You're just not going to buy yourself anything because you have some kind of guilty feeling about it. Example of that is, mindset may be hesitate. Somebody may go to, a coffee shop and the coffee's $5. They can afford it. It's not a big deal. They ain't buying it. That $5, that's ridiculous because they remember there was a day that they couldn't afford $5. So they just simply don't live in a life of abundance. They live in a life of scarcity. Now, there's another thing too. There's this thing called we call emotional weight of money. Money becomes more than a tool. It's tied to feeling of safety and identity and worth. A lot of times, that if we have, my uncle was this way. He was a chiropractor in Missouri, and they would not buy new vehicles. They bought older vehicles that were just very like old Buicks, not like old, but older Buicks. They were luxury cars, but they were always beige. They were not showy at all because he didn't want his patients thinking he made too much money. And they lived way out where no one could see their home. They didn't want anybody to know where they lived. And it was that also that mindset of that. Sometimes people they go through this mindset of they receive unexpected money and it feels like a windfall. And this could be a collection day or maybe a collection month. And what that does is some people it triggers that spend it while we have it, or the urge to save obsessively, so fear that they'll never get it again. Like they just, you have a record month and you did nothing with it. You didn't invest it. You didn't pay anything off. You just saved it. I know somebody like that, a chiropractor like that. he, years ago, I don't really talk to him much anymore, but every time he talked to me, he wanted to tell me how much money he had saved, right? That was all he wanted to talk about. And I'm like, well, let's talk about how we're going to see more patients, but he wanted to talk about how much he was saving. So there's some long-term mental psychological effects of this, this mindset. It doesn't, a lot of times what happens is when you're younger and then when your situation improves, it doesn't disappear. I read a story one time, and you guys want to read something really fascinating. There was you all know what discount tires, if you're in the other countries, you don't. But here in the United States, we have discount tires. And the guy was a billionaire. And there's a book about it, if you'll pull that up. And it's a great story. And one of the things that I thought was funny, him and his first wife started this, and they lived through the Depression. And so it was, really, really tough. Well, then he started a tire store, and then it grew, and then now he's a billionaire. Well, his first wife passed away, and then he remarried his second wife, and they were on their jet, a G5, a Gulfstream 5, going to one of their big events. And the guy that wrote the book, he was hired to basically do the autobiography for it, or the biography of it. And he's sitting there, and he writes this passage. He said, "This is how fascinating it is that this man's wife, who she's a billionaire now. They're literally on a Gulfstream. Her and her best friend are sitting at one of the tables on this plane, and she's clipping coupons, grocery coupons, to save 15 or 20 cents on ketchup or this or that. It's because she lived through the Depression, and you never know when all this is going away. She's literally a billionaire clipping coupons. That long-term psychological effect, just because your situation improves, it doesn't go away. Now, here's something that this is called decision fatigue, and I read this here recently, and I wanted to share it with you guys. Constantly worrying about money can exhaust your mental reserves, leading to poor decisions over time. If you're always worrying about not having enough, you'll make bad decisions because you'll just get tired. This is why people in the scarcity often make irrational choices. They're simply overburdened by the mental load. I don't know how many people I know that they do things irrationally just because they're in a constant fear and a state of anxiety over whether they're ever going to make any more money or not. The fear of loss, the trauma of losing money as simply not having enough as a child can lead to excessive fear of losing what you have as an adult. This can lead to an unwilling to invest in the future. I think that's really worth, saying that again. If you've ever lost money or you've ever lived with not having enough as a child, you can have this fear, this internal fear that as an adult, and this, you don't want to invest in the future. You want to hang on to everything right now. I remember one time, a good friend of mine now, but when I met him, it was at a meeting years and years and years ago. And I remember him saying that they were talking about the physical therapist adjusting and taking away personal injuries. And he said, if I lose one more PI, I'll have to shut my doors. And I'm listening to him, and I'm like, are you kidding me? I mean, and I was seeing about 200 a week back then, and just having the time of my life. I was just in a growth state of mind. I ended up taking him to lunch, and he went from that state of mind to hugely successful. But it's that fear of loss that'll come back, right? Self-worth. Many who grow up with less than others have this the belief that their value is directly linked to the ability to produce or earn. This can result in overwork and a burnout, and really just enjoying any kind of downtime. I really, what's interesting is I'm bringing up my father, because that's what we did. We learned from our parents. He worked so hard through the week and just worked hard. He was up early, he worked hard all week, and then he would get away on the weekends, and his escape, instead of doing something with the money he worked or creating more for the future, it was that instant personal gratification, fishing and hunting and drinking beer with his buddies. That was his escape from having to work hard all week. And I really believe that it was a defense mechanism. And sometimes, this is what I see a lot of times, this imposter syndrome. If you escape the poverty, you feel that you truly don't belong or you don't deserve it. This is a lot of chiropractors. And really, a lot of what I see in practice is a lot of chiropractors, they don't feel like they deserve it. They look at it like, well, there was a day that they couldn't afford that care. You give somebody a $1,800 or $2,000 treatment plan, and it gives them anxiety because they remember when there's no way they could afford that. And so if somebody was to tell them that, they would, there's no way. And so you internalize that. And so then you start creating more money. And I remember, what's crazy is I remember so well when we first started our practice, when we started first making money, this was back before automatic deposits from insurance companies and stuff. And I remember this was, 30, 28, 27, 26 years ago, 26 years ago. And my staff would bring me the checks for the day. And I would lay them on my desk and I would like go through them, and there'd be $500 or $600 worth of checks. And I would take my drawer and I'd put it in my drawer and I'd shut the drawer and just sit there. I remember doing it specifically because it's an emotion. Like you don't forget an emotional thing. And I'm thinking, they're going to come, I'm doing something wrong. They're going to come and take this all from me. I shouldn't have. And this is only $500 or $600 at that time. It was more than I ever made. Gosh, I was making that for a whole 2 weeks salary before, and now I made that in one day. I've lived all of this. You have that imposter syndrome. That's what a lot of CAs too. A lot of your CAs have a problem with collecting across the counter because they have that imposter syndrome too. They have a hard time asking patients for money because they feel guilty about it. Now here's the thing, we can talk about all these different things, and I want you guys to spend some time with it and kind of ask yourself and think about, where all this comes from, right? Where does this all come from? When you were raised or how you were raised or whatever, and then we'll start breaking it down. But now that we kind of have an understanding of, this is internalized fears, what are we going to do about it? And the good news is, while the scarcity mindset is powerful, it's not permanent. You can change it. You can change it, and with awareness, that's why we're talking about it, intention. Again, the reason I'm bringing all this up, I know this might be a little bit odd for our group, but it's not, because I do coaching calls with y'all, and I see a lot of you start to grow, and you get to a certain level, and then you drop back down, you don't know why. Well, 2 reasons. 1, you're running the practice the way it is, not the way you want it to be, and 2, you've internalized the scarcity mindset, and as soon as you start to grow, which means you make more money, you'll sabotage it. You'll have imposter mindset, or you will feel like you're not worthy. I mean, there's all these different things. And so with the awareness and intention, you can gradually shift toward abundance mindset. And then that's the belief that there's enough resources and opportunities to go around. It's a universal law. There is so much available to us, you cannot overachieve. There's just too much available. So we got to reframe. We got to do some reframing of our narrative. We got to challenge that belief that there's never enough. And one of the things is recognize how far you come. I mean, I look at where I came from and what I have. Oh my gosh, it's amazing. But that doesn't mean I'm going to sit back and go, okay, I've got everything I want, I got everything I need. Now I can just try to hang on to it. Don't do more. Don't don't lose what I got. Because that's the quickest way to sabotaging everything you created, everything you worked hard. And many of you do that, right? Remind yourself that you're no longer in survival mode. Now, some of you, listen, I get it. I've talked to you. You guys are going through some tough things. You're just getting started in practice, or both CAs left, or whatever. You kind of are in a survival mode, but that's not what I'm getting at. Understand that there is so much available to you, but don't hold yourself back with the scarcity mindset we're talking about. Don't give yourself that crutch, okay? I want you guys to do this. I want you guys to write down 3 ways that your financial situation improved compared to how you were raised. Just write 3 little things down. And the only reason I'm having you do that is so it makes you more aware. I think we ignore those things. I know I've talked to a lot of doctors. I talked to a doctor one time, and he was telling me how hard he was working, and he was seeing about 175 a week. And I said, did you ever have a job before chiropractic? He goes, yeah, I worked on a farm, a dairy farm. And I said, well, I understand that. I said, how hard was that? He goes, oh Lord, we were up at 3:30 and then we had to put up hay, and then we had to work in the hayfield, and then we go back. And I said, so tell me again how you're working hard. Well, you got a point, and it's perspective, right? So that's what I want you to do is I want you to write down 3 ways, just 3 ways in where you can absolutely kind of re-look at, how your world and your life has improved. I want you guys to, this is something that I've learned, through the years, and I'm not the best at it. I want to talk about this, but I'm not perfect. But something that is called intentional spending. Instead of hoarding things out of fear and hang on everything, or spending impulsively, like spending everything you got, create a plan that aligns with your values and makes sense to you. I mean, create a spending plan. Jeremy Rodrock did an amazing job at the last workshop. If you haven't watched it, I'm going to actually take that part of his talk and put it in Foundation One. But he talked about creating a plan where not only is a plan for right now, a plan for this year, and then a plan for 20 years from now. I think it's really, really important. And what that does is it gives you a sense of security, and a lot of this scarcity stuff that we're talking about goes away. All right. And then, so the other thing we're going to do is, and this is something that Jim Campbell, you're going to love this, is, allow yourself trophy purchases to break that cycle of guilt with financial goals. I had to have help with this in the beginning, but one of the, when you work hard and you achieve a goal, go purchase something. Go buy your wife a car, or buy a watch or something. It's one of those things. If you don't, I believe this. If you're working hard and you're working hard and you're working hard, and either you're spending your money on irrelevant things and you just don't see it, you don't have anything to show for it, or you're saving it all and you don't see it, which is good, but at the same time, if you don't have some trophies, if you don't reward yourself for the hard work you put in, you'll get to the point where you're like, well, why am I doing this? Why am I working so hard? And it's a psychological thing. I get it, but I'm that way, and I've had trophies through the years, and I'm still thinking about different stuff that we've accomplished so much, and I have all these ridiculous things, but I still see more in the future. That's what created everything we have today, is because I have that attitude, but it's also going to keep us growing. I want you guys to start focusing on long-term goals, right? This, scarcity emphasizes the present, and abundance mindset prioritizes the future. The scarcity is like, right now, hang on to what I have, don't let it go. Set goals that reflect where you want to be, not just what you need to do to survive today. And that kind of goes back to your practice too. Set your goals, run your practice the way you want it, not the way it is. And I will tell you this is going to be hard for some of you to understand, but I want you to start mentally living the way you want to be, not the way you are, right? Start doing that. I want you to do this. Identify one investment, whether it's education, an investment in in training, or your health, or a relationship, that you can make without immediate payoff. I think that's one of the most important things that you can do is learn to invest in yourself, whether it be those things or financials that you're not going to get an immediate payoff. And what that does is it removes that need to survive today attitude, right? And then cultivate a mindset of enough. Practice gratitude for you, and understanding that you have the ability and potential to create more. I'm going to tell you that gratitude is one of the strongest human emotions that there is. If you just are grateful for the things you have, and recognize how good things are, it's amazing, because then what you do is when you recognize that and have gratitude for it, more of that comes, right? Practice gratitude regularly. And what it does, when you practice it regularly, it strengthens what's called a neural pathway. And then it's associated with positive thinking. And the more you do it, the stronger it's like a muscle, right? And then I want you to, what this does is it reduces the brain's focus on negative and scarcity, right? So the more you practice gratitude and the more you understand that there is so much more available, again, I just said it, it's like strengthening a muscle. The stronger it gets, well, then your brain creates this environment that anything is possible. And then gratitude shifts your energy and makes you more open to possibilities. I think if you're not grateful for what you have, then you start taking it for granted, and then it doesn't have, then it means nothing. It doesn't have any power. All right. Now, here's another thing I want you guys to start doing. Connect with other doctors here at Foundation. I want you to connect with those, and especially those that live in abundance, who have overcome this for whatever reason. They've learned to overcome it, and they have bigger dreams, and they push for more. And what happens is when you surround yourself with people who want more, push for more, it creates that energy in your life. Surrounding yourself with growth-minded doctors will change how you see money and accomplishments. And this is, I'm going to be honest with you. I was in some of you know this, some of you don't. I was in a coaching group before I created this one, and I will tell you, for a lot of reasons. One, For the first time ever, I heard the word report of findings. I didn't know what that meant. I had a system that I never had a system before, but more than anything, I was surrounded with a large number of doctors that were hugely successful. I mean, these doctors were wearing new suits, they were driving new cars, they were living in new homes, and they were really good people, and they showed me that it was okay. And then I'm watching this, and I'm watching how they live, and I'm watching, how they were raising their families and the things they got to do, the trips they got to go on, and the way they provided for their family. And then I spent time with them and realized they're just a chiropractor like I am. And then so my attitude is, if they can do it, I can do it. And it was really, really helpful. So that's what I want you guys to do. That's why you guys look, this is why this perspective, it normalizes growth. This is why we do the retreats. I want you guys to, we're going to Italy this year. Well, there's several people going on this trip. They've never been out of the country, or they've been to Mexico, and that's it. They've never been to Europe. And this is like pushing them way out of their comfort zone. But again, what it does is expand your mind and realizes what's possible and what's out there. And that's why we do these things. The scarcity mindset is a natural response to growing up poor, going through some very tough times in your life. But it doesn't have to define your future. If you recognize these patterns and shape your decisions intentionally and begin to train in abundance and mindset, you can recreate your brain from survival thinking to, the possibility life, right? You can really, what I'm saying is with this is, I wrote these things down, but I want you to understand that the way things are right now, if you're in this, if this is you can retrain it, you can recreate it, but it's got to be a consistent action, right? You got to have consistent action. When Shannon and I, we both came from the same area. We both worked hard. We both really didn't have much. I mean, it was, when we got together, it was a struggle for the first few years, but we made a decision that we were not going to allow that to create our future. And we weren't going to allow our children to grow up that way either. And our kids have grown, our three kids have been raised to know anything is possible, that there is no lack, that achieving and having things and creating a good life is not a bad thing. What's funny is my kids remind me of this. When they would get in trouble as teenagers, I would go to the room and I would make them read Think and Grow Rich, right? And they would, it was funny. I know my oldest one, she's like, "Can you just spank me?" No, I want you to read this. I want you to read it, and I want you to pay attention to it. And I'm really proud of that, because all three of my kids now, there is in their brains, there is no such thing as scarcity or lack. It's only I will and I can, and then they go do. And what I love about that is, from my father back, it was the poor is proud mentality, that poor hillbilly mentality. But from Shannon and I forward, I know my grandkids will grow up in a world of abundance and understanding that anything is possible. Work hard, but expand your mind and expect it, and you'll get that. I'm going to tell you something I think that is probably pretty impactful, that a lot of chiropractors that I know, most chiropractors that I know, make more money than their parents or anybody in their family. And if you and that's really what happens, is that you find a level of guilt because you're making so much more than they are, so you'll hold yourself back. I remember when I first hit 200 a week, 200 patients a week, I was talking to my mother on the phone, and I was like, hit 200, and I said, if I keep working hard, I do this, I could be at 300 a week by the end of the year. And her phrase was, "All right, son, let's not get greedy." And I started, at the time, it kind of took the wind out of myself. But when I look back, it's not my mom's fault. That's the way she was raised. And in her brain, I was seeing 200, which she worked for a chiropractor, and they were seeing like 20 a week. I'm seeing 200. So in her brain, oh my gosh, that's, what more could you ask for? Well, then I'm saying I want to go to 300, and then she couldn't wrap her mind around it. She absolutely couldn't wrap her mind around it. So it's interesting that has just been transferred from one generation to the next, and that happens a lot. But then there's chiropractors who come from successful families, and they've grown up with successful families, and all they've known is abundance. Like well, like Alicia, she's a chiropractor, and she's known in Boston, and for her to succeed and see a lot of people and create a huge income, she expected it because that's what you do. That's what was possible. And so I want you guys to finish up. I want you guys to spend some time with this and ask yourself, because but here's the thing: if you're seeing all the patients you want to see and you're making more money than you can ever possibly imagine, then good for you. God bless you. I'm glad. That's what I want. That's the whole purpose behind this group, is to lead you in that direction. But if somewhere in your heart, somewhere inside of you, you feel like you're being held back, like something's not allowing you to push forward. It may be this. It may be this internalizing thoughts that you carry around with you that have followed you as a kid. Malachi, you and I have had this conversation. James Rose, you and I have had this conversation. There's been several of us. And I talk to a lot of you, and I can hear the tones of this in your voice and in your comments and your questions. You don't come right out and say it, but I know it's there. So with that being said, I want you guys to start training and start preparing and start having gratitude. Start reading and listening to things about abundance and about creating. If you haven't read Think and Grow Rich, start there. I mean, I think that's amazing. But understand that it's not a bad thing. It's your right. It's your right to be successful. It's your right to achieve. It's your right to create and grow. And and like I told James, if you're guilty about making a lot of money, okay, well then give it all away. Like what I want you guys to do. If you have an internal guilt that you can't get over because you feel guilty about having that much money, fine. Create a practice. You're helping a lot of people generate twice as much income, and then take half of that income and donate it. Give it to somebody. Pay someone's house off. Buy them a car. I got to spend time, and he'll be watching this. And Danny, over in Switzerland, over in the Netherlands, I was just there, and he come from a very affluent family, right? Danny come from a very affluent family, and he decided that he was going to blaze his own path. And so he went out and started his practice with no help from his father. He bought his first house with no help from his father. Matter of fact, his family is very affluent, and he is buying a house in his country with kind of like a duplex, what we call here. Then that way, when his family comes to visit, they have their own place. He's doing that, and so I was so inspired by him, and over there in Sweden, that is not a common attitude. It's like survival. But Danny comes from an attitude of creating an abundance. And so not only is he creating abundance for him and his wife, he's got 4 clinics and getting ready to open a clinic in Dubai. It's just amazing. In a short period of time, he's doing all this. He's also, he bought his sister an apartment. He bought his other sister a house. And they're both successful. He bought them these things. He has this creating of, I'm going to create all this abundance, but I'm not doing it for me. I'm doing it for everybody. And I think that is a lesson we all can learn. So I hope tonight was impactful. If you guys have any questions, just reach out to me, send me a message on this. And then I will talk to you guys in the morning. Have an amazing evening. I love you all. Talk to you soon. Bye.